Yesterday morning in Gaza, the world witnessed the true face of Islam. Coffins with babies, a substitute even for a mother, all abducted during a savage religious bloodlust massacre on 10/7/23. For no other reasons than Muslims have been bred to want to kill Jews, to plunder them, to rape them since the days of Muhammad. And that is the purpose of this program. I want to equate what the world witnessed, not only on 10/7/23, but also what the world witnessed as Muslims celebrated the death of children yesterday, storming the stage and dancing, throwing out candy, singing songs, waving their arms, all celebrating their abduction and murder of little children for no other reason than they're Muslims and the victims were Jews. It's time that the world see the true face of Islam as the religion was instigated by Muhammad, because there was a replica for 10/7/23. Now, 10/7/23, the flood of Al-Aqsa had nothing to do with Hamas. That bloody attack was inspired by Muhammad, and it occurred 1,400 years ago. And because the world is so goddamn ignorant of Islam, was allowed to occur again. And every one of those precious Jewish lives that were snuffed out on that day, nearly 1,300, and the 250 captives, including that little boy and girl, Baba's family, all died because Jews were so full of themselves, they didn't even bother to learn their history. They thought that if they were just nice, if they just fit in with other people, if they just treated their neighbors kindly, that they would receive the same in return. Completely ignorant of Islam, as is the IDF, as is the government of Israel, as is the Shin Bet, as is the Mossad. Shame on you, Israel. All of what happened on 10/7 is a direct result of your unwillingness to face the fact that your enemy for the last 1,400 years has been Islam, and that you will never live in peace and harmony with Muslims. It is impossible. You cannot modify Islam. You can't reform Islam. You can't change Hamas or Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Fatah, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority. None of it is possible. And the reason none of it is possible is that Islam is unchanged in 1,400 years, and nothing is going to alter that. Because it is the Islam of the Quran. It is the Islam of the Hadith. It's the Islam of Muhammad and the first Muslims that perpetrated the attack that was copied on 10/7. So it is essential that you know the truth. On our last program in the YAHOWAH blog, and I am your host, Craig Winn, I am the one who has written the most comprehensive analysis of the Islamic scriptures ever previously presented. 5 volumes, each 825 pages, each detailing the Islamic scriptures at the beginning of Islam, revealing exactly who Muhammad was, what he did, what he said, how the Quran came into existence, what it conveys, and how Islam was born out of terrorist raids. How it was the blood of Jews that made this religion possible. And no one knows it better than I do. I have been offering goddamn religion to you for free, since it was rewritten at beginning on October 7th of 23. And before that, it was Prophet of Doom, which has been available for over 20 years, all free, for you to read to understand the truth of this religion. Right after 9/11 in America, I met with Al-Qaeda. I met with Hamas. I met with Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. I'm the only American to ever survive such a meeting. And I learned exactly why they terrorize and kill. They told me so. And I told you. And then I wrote the most comprehensive analysis of the Islamic scriptures heretofore. First in Prophet of Doom and now in Goddamn Religious. It's time you know the truth. Yesterday in Gaza, you saw the true face of Islam. And what you also saw in Gaza is that your war against Hamas failed. You made a bad situation worse. By eliminating 20,000 Islamic jihadists, you manufactured 40,000. I told you it was going to happen. You didn't listen. That is the math of religion. You cannot fight Islam with bullets and bombs. You have to wield words wisely. And the only way for you to do that is to shed your ignorance of the religion, to come to know it based upon its own scriptures, and then expose and condemn the religion based upon its own scriptures. They are bloodlust. They are savage. They are sadistic. They are murderous. There is nothing in Islam that has any value. The Quran is the worst book ever written. It is murderous. It is a terrorist manifesto. Allah demands that Muslims fight and die for him to their last breath, and that they kill all who do not capitulate to Islam. There is nothing salvageable in the religion. And you need to know that, because until you properly diagnose Islam and then rid yourself of this curse by exposing and condemning it with your words instead of your bombs, they will continue to kill you. They will continue to abduct and murder your children, rape your daughters, and massacre and torture your grandparents. Bukhari is the most treasured of all of the Islamic hadith collections, although it is actually third in importance. Ibn Ishaq's Sirah is by far the most important document in Islam, actually more important than the Quran. Without it, the Quran cannot be understood. It cannot be arranged chronologically. Islam cannot even be practiced. Nothing is known of Muhammad. And so Ishaq's Sirah is the most important document in Islam, probably followed by Tabari's Takrit, the history of Islam's formation, then the Quran, and then this collection of hadith that is topically arranged by Bukhari. I will begin where I ended the last program, Volume 5, Book 59, number 512. The Prophet offered the Fajr prayer. That is the prayer of fear, near Kabar, when it was still dark. He said, Allahu Akbar. Kabar is destroyed. For whenever we approach a hostile nation to fight, then evil will be the morning for those who have been warned. Then the inhabitants of Kabar came out, running on their roads. The Prophet had their men killed. Their women and children were taken as captives. This is in the immediate aftermath of Muhammad doing the same thing to the Qurayza Jews in Yathrib, where he killed every man and boy, slicing off their heads, dumping their bodies and decapitated heads in a trough that was dug in the center of Yathrib, today's Medina, in the town square. One after another, 10 hours of screaming. And then he played a game of lots to determine which woman each Muslim could claim to rape. And then the children were not only taken as slaves, they were traded for weapons of war so that Muslims could perpetrate this attack and use the same procedure. Kill the men, rape the women, sell the children into slavery for weapons of war. This is Islam. And when you hear Allahu Akbar, be very much aware that Allahu Akbar does not mean, as the libertard progressives that are the talking heads of the media would lie to you and say, God is great. That is not what it means. Allah is not the Arabic word for God. Allah is the name of the Islamic God. And it means Allah is greater. And as greater, you have to ask, greater than whom? And because the prayer of fear, Allahu Akbar, was first issued here outside of this Jewish farming community as a terrorist raid upon them, as they intended to annihilate them, it should be obvious. And if rabbis hadn't erased Yahweh's name, you would know the answer to that question. Allahu Akbar means Allah is greater than Yahweh. Now, of course, Allah is nothing but a snake. He is the snake that slithered out of Gan Eden. He is the adversary, Hasatan. And so he's not greater than even a human life. That's why he has no miracles. That's why he has nothing inventive in the entirety of the Quran or Hadith. These were just thugs killing for a demonic spirit. Allah, though, as Satan, craves being worshipped as a god, and as such, he wants to present himself as being greater than Yahweh. That is what Allahu Akbar means. And you don't know it, Israel, but you need to, which is why I'm taking the time to explain it to you, because you cannot defend yourself from Islam unless you come to accept the truth about Islam. Yes, Allahu Akbar was first uttered by Muhammad. It means Allah is greater than the God of the Jews. When it is uttered, it is a prayer of fear. It is a terrorist manifesto. And indeed, it is the entree to evil. The farming community of Kabar would have their men killed, their children and women taken as captives with the women raped. One of the most revealing insights into Allah's nature and the purpose of Islam is, of course, made evident when the religious terrorist prayer is Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater. It was initially cited to antagonize the last remaining community of Yehudim, Jews in Arabia. Indeed, it is only within this context that Allah is greater, while wrong is understandable from the wannabe God's perspective. His purpose, the intent of the Quran, the reason for Islam, and the explanation for his rage against Yehudim is that Allah is at war with Yahweh. Halal is spewing venom in God's face and declaring victory. Allahu Akbar was intended to convey that Allah is greater than Yahweh, that Satan is Almighty God, that one intent on annihilating humankind is talking smack against the God who loved and inspired Yehudim, the beloved of Yah. Satan is antagonizing Yahweh by abusing his family and fulfilling all that was written about him in Yeshaya, Isaiah chapter 14, which explains this very behavior. Allahu Akbar is confirmation that Allah is Satan. There is no other who would make such a claim. Allah has been scheming about this for some time. Akbar is an elative adjective derived from the noun kabir, great. It means greater, greatest, better, bigger, older, or utmost. The adjective was first used at the conclusion of the second surah. Quran 2:217 reads, "They question you about fighting in al-Haram, the sacred and forbidden month. Say, fighting therein is a akbar, a greater." I have to put brackets omitted because they forgot to write greater than what. But hindering to prevent access to the cause of Allahi and disbelief in him and al-Masjid, al-Haram, and driving out his people from it is a akbar, greater, omitted, near Allahi, and trials a greater, once again omitted, than the slaughter. It's a comparative term. The fact that the Quran forgot compared to what? It's a problem with Allah's diction and the fact that he appears to be as illiterate as his non-prophet. The adjective was deployed 3 times, and on each occasion, the noun it was modifying was omitted. That is because Allahu was hoarding Akbar, lahu, this superiority for himself. Well, the second suratan was overly anti-Semitic. In fact, the most anti-Semitic text probably ever written, far worse than Mein Kampf. Allahu wanted to showcase Allahu Akbar when it would be the most dramatic and cause the greatest pain to Yahweh and Yehudim. This occurred when the last of Yahweh's cherished Yehudim were being humiliated, terrorized, plundered, enslaved, raped, and annihilated. Kabar was the opportune occasion for Satan to gloat. And so he did. By debuting Allahu Akbar at Kabar, Satan was stabbing Yahweh in the heart while debilitating his people. He was telling both that the snake who slithered out of the garden, Hasatan, the adversary, had risen and was about to strike. He was now greater than Yahweh in the minds of those he had bribed into slaughtering and spoiling Jews. From the adversary's perspective, Allahu Akbar declares that he had achieved his life's ambition. He was bigger than God, the one that had sentenced him to grovel in the dirt as a serpent. Allahu Akbar is a taunt, announcing that Allah is greater than Yahweh, the God of the Yehudim. I beg to differ. But then again, I have worked on behalf of Yahweh for the last 23 years. And I've done a more comprehensive job at denouncing the true identity of Allah for most of that time. And I know how this will end. It's actually interesting. And maybe I shouldn't go into this now because it might be a bit of a distraction. But now that I have started, Satan's last hurrah will actually be to kill me. I am his adversary. I'm the one who renounced his religious role in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam with 13 volumes that prove who the God of those religions actually is. And I'm the one who revealed who the actual Messiah and Son of God is, our Savior, Dode, for fulfilling Pisak, Batsan, Bakorim. I'm the one who reintroduced Yahweh's name to his people and reacquainted them with the terms and conditions of the Bereth covenant and the Mikra invitations to meet with God, and provide the timing so that you would know exactly what's going to happen between now and Dod's return with Yahowah in 2033. And so I'm the one who has spoiled his plans. And so he will finally take it out on me, because you will find me again, should you not think that I am telling you the truth about the role that Yahowah has asked me to play. You will see me again on the Temple Mount, cleansed of the scars that Satan has had put there to Allahu Akbar over Yahowah. The Dome of the Rock and Alaska Mosque will be gone. And I will be standing there next to Elia. And we will be speaking to all who will listen from the Temple Mount. And that will be the order of our business as witnesses until the sun rises to a full solar eclipse on the Shabat of September 24th in 2033, year 6000 Yah, the 120th Yobel year. And at that time, I will have the 7 Ruach who empower, embolden, enable, enlighten me move aside, as well as the many thousands of Malach that Yahowah has assigned to protect me. They will all stand down, and Elia will summon Satan just as he summoned Ahab, Satan's representative over Israel, 40 Yobel, 888 years earlier. Vulnerable, deliberately. Just as David allowed Rome to beat him and to crucify him to fulfill Pesach, I will allow Satan, Hasatan, the corporeal manifestation of this serpent, to beat me to death on the Temple Mount for all to see at the end of my 3.5 years of witnessing on behalf of Yahowah and his people. It will be a gruesome spectacle, all, however, supervised and made available as the final sacrifice for the remaining remnant of Israel. Because it's what Yahowah will do with it, and what Elia will say about this sacrifice that will finally prepare this final remnant of Israelites for the return of their Messiah, Dod, and their God, Yahowah. And so I have quite the battle going with this dark spirit. I know him. He knows me. And I will continue to repudiate him, particularly since he has called out God's people, Yehudim, who I serve, as his principal victims. Turning back the clock 14 centuries, the warning these Jews were given before evil befell them was no different than what Muslims provide today. If you will watch any of the film from 10/7, you will realize that they screamed Allahu Akbar so often it will make your skin break out in hives. Even the 9/11 suicide bombers shouted Allahu Akbar before they slaughtered thousands. The same thing occurred, as I have shared, not only in the morning of 10/7, but as they celebrated returning babies back to Israel in coffins, they shouted Allahu Akbar. By announcing the prayer of fear, Islamic terrorists tell us who they are, what they believe, who they serve, and why they kill. It is a confession that no one seems willing to process. It tells you that Islam is responsible for the deaths of so many Jews, for terrorism worldwide, not an Islamic terrorist group. Islam. As noted, since Akbar is an adjective, by making this claim, Allahu was acknowledging that he was in competition with another God, the God. And he was prevailing, at least among Muslims. But of course, being greater begs the question, better than whom? And the answer, incredulously enough, is Yahweh. This is why Muslims are taught to lie about this and lead non-Muslims to believe that Allahu Akbar is to be read, God is great. That is not possible because Allahu means the for him and is not the Arabic word for God. And Akbar is an adjective and not a noun. Allahu Akbar is a meritless brag, an irritating taunt, and a confession, one that tells us that Satan, in the guise of Allahu, is trying to do what was predicted of him 1,400 years ago in Yahowah 14. And so now we know. Actually, it would be 2,700 years ago in Yahowah 14. Islam is 1,400 years old, but Yahowah wrote in the 8th century BCE. Tabari 7, volume 7, page 162, and Ishak's Sirah, page 445, again, for those who may be listening to this as the first program. The reference numbers I am providing are from the SUNY, the State University of New York Press, publication of the 12 volumes of Al-Tabari's history, the Torah, and from Oxford Presses, University Presses, presentation of Ishak's Surat Rasul Allah. It reads from both of these two sources, one confirming the other. The rules of the prayer of fear were revealed during this raid. Then they cite Quran 4:102. The message of Allah divided the companions into two groups. The messenger of Allah did so. One stood facing the enemy while the other stood behind the prophet. He magnified Allah by shouting, Allahu Akbar. And those who were behind him performed a rak'ah, and they prostrated themselves. Yes, mooning the real God while putting one nose in the dirt to honor the snake is essential to Islam. And even though they said there would be no prayer this day, just killing, it was worth contradicting the earlier hadith to make Allahu Akbar sound religious. Bukhari 5, book 59, number 516. When Allah's apostle fought or raided people, we raised our voices saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. None has the right to be worshipped but Allah. Yes, that is the thrust of Islam. You either worship Allah, who is demonic, who spends all of his time in hell, even in the Quran, who is a nitwit, a liar, totally impotent, incompetent, the worst author in the history of books. He had nothing inventive to say, nothing worthwhile to say, nothing moral to convey. The entire Quran is plagiarized and twisted. All of it. It's just a nasty recital. And you either worship that piece of crap or Muslims will kill you. Allahu Akbar. And even if they're of the mind to kill you, it doesn't matter what you agree to do. Well, this was the result. Ishak 572. Remind you, Ishak is arguably the most important book in Islam. It's the first to chronicle the words and deeds of Muhammad. And without the words and deeds of Muhammad, there is no religion. Muhammad is the man, an apostle of my Lord, who errs not, neither does he sin. Any who would rival him in goodness must fail. Evil was the state of our enemy, so they lost the day. Fortunes change when we came upon them like lions from the thickets. The armies of Allah came openly, flying at them in rage, so that they could not get away. We destroyed them, and we forced them to surrender. In the former days, there was no battle like this. Their blood flowed freely. We slew them, and we left them in the dust. Those who escaped were choked with terror. A multitude of them were slain. This is Allah's war, in which those who do not accept Islam will have no helper. War destroyed the tribe, and fate the clan. End quote. Even the worst of this, where these animals extolled what they thought were the virtues of Muhammad, is horrendous. Muhammad never got a single prophecy correct. He couldn't even recount his own testimony correctly. He admitted to lying. The Quran even acknowledges that he lied. His lifestyle was based upon sexual perversion. He was incestuous. He was a pedophile. He was a rapist. Now, if that's not sin, perhaps we need a new definition. He was a bloodthirsty terrorist. He was a mass murderer. He engaged and funded Islam through the slave trade. He tortured men. He assassinated everyone who spoke against him. Muhammad was the worst man who ever lived. If this is a man who does not err and who does not sin, then you can be assured that Islam has reinvented terms so that the worst evil is now considered sanctified, that bad is now good, that truth are now lies. This is why you cannot reason with a Muslim. Anything that any civil human being would view as an atrocity, like mass murder, terrorism, rape, incest, pedophilia, torture, terrorism, they view as good, because Muhammad did those things, and Muhammad's example must be followed. In him, there is no rival in goodness. I guess he was the best pedophile ever. 66 with a 6-year-old girl. Maybe he was the best rapist ever because he got so much practice at it. Maybe he was the best terrorist ever because he led 75 terrorist raids. Maybe he was the best ever mass murderer. Maybe these are the good that defined Islam, the goods of Islam. And yet, they will blame their victims, just as they did yesterday morning in Gaza, where they put up a poster and blamed Netanyahu for the abduction and the death of the little children that they had kidnapped and murdered. Fortunes change, yes, indeed. When the armies of Allah, by the way, they were not armies. Islam, in its formative years under Muhammad, never fought an army ever once, and they never comprised an army. It was gangs of mujahideen, terrorists, just like what you saw on 10/7. Throngs of terrorists, as the first Muslims raiding civilians. That was 100% of the 75 raids that initiated Islam in its first 10 years. Yes, Islam destroyed them. Islam forced those who didn't die to surrender. They enslaved them. And he's correct. In all of the history of the Arabs, there was nothing this savage. Islam set a new standard for sadistic. Rivers of blood flowed freely. And they have flowed right to Muhammad's feet ever since. I get so tired in social media, on X and other platforms, as I have to correct Jews who want to blame Hamas or Iran or the Ayatollah or Hezbollah or someone else, Palestinians, for the terror that has been perpetrated on them. These are simply symptoms of Islam. The blood flows directly from Muhammad's feet. That is why Jews have been slain and their bodies left in the dust. If you haven't seen the raw footage of 10/7, I would encourage you to do so, because it is exactly what this described. People were choked with terror. Did you see the face of Miss Bibas as they were abducting her and her children? Yes, this is Allah's war, and it is against all humankind. There is nothing more Muhammad and Muslims do to make the terrorist nature of their religion more obvious. This is from Bukhari, Volume 5, Book 59, number 516. When Allah's apostle fought the Battle of Kabar, this was no battle. This was a terrorist onslaught. Or when he raided any other people, we raised our voices crying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. None has the right to be worshipped except Allah. On that, Allah's apostle said, lower your voices, for you are not calling a deaf or an absent one, but a hearer who is with you. That would make Allah a co-conspirator to terror, to mass murder, to genocide, to human trafficking, to torture. I suppose it becomes him. On that he said to me, O Abdallah, shall I tell you a sentence which is one of the treasures of paradise? Oh, I said, yes, O Allah's apostle, let my father and mother be sacrificed for your sake. What an odd thing to say. He said, there is neither might nor power but with Allah. That's why Muslims lose every war. That's why Muslims resort to terrorism, because they can't fight like men. That's why they go in and they rape little girls. They abduct little children. They take grandparents out of their homes. That's why they fight people who are unarmed, because Allah has no power. And Muslims are impotent and incompetent. Who was he greater than, by the way, if not Yahweh? The God whose witness he has constantly misappropriated throughout the Quran. Why would Satan risk this becoming the signature shout of his religion, since it nullifies his primary claim, no God but him? You can't have no God but him and have Allah be greater than another God. It is as if the opportunity to taunt God and his people by declaring supremacy over them trumped reason. Although, to be fair, Satan has never been very smart. Tabari, Volume 8, page 116, Ishaq 511. By the way, if you want to find the verification for each of these citations, if you want the full publicized documentation of Tabari's volumes, when they were published, who translated them, same thing with Ishaq's Sirah, then you should go to Goddamn Religion. I'm sharing this from Volume 4, but if you read Volume 1 and also Volume 5, you will find a full bibliography that presents all of this information, because Goddamn Religion is also the most documented, the most accurately documented and presented compilation of Islam scriptures ever written. So Muhammad began seizing their herds and their property bit by bit. He conquered Kabar home by home. You notice, not garrison by garrison, not division by division. No, he first seized their herds, their sheep, and then their property, and then their homes, home by home. The first defeated was Naam, next was Kamas, the community of Abi Hukak. The messenger took some of its people captive, including Safiya bint Huray. She was the wife of Kanana and her two cousins. The prophet chose Safiya for himself. After torturing her husband, her father, her brothers, and killing them, Muhammad, this miserable, malcontent Muslim piece of trash, raped Safiya. This is the lone messenger of Allah, and he was the most despicable man who ever lived. For someone to believe in a religion founded by this scum is not right in the head. They have no conscience. To kill on behalf of this piece of trash, Muhammad, is to be wholly ignorant and completely immoral. Psychopath is too kind an assessment for Muhammad. He became the first serial rapist, terrorist, thief, and mass murderer to call himself a prophet. And normally, terrorists are considered bad, so are armed robbers, mass murderers, sexual perverts, and human traffickers. But not this one. He was heralded as a great prophet, even though he never had a prophecy that came true. He was exceedingly immoral, never once saying anything intelligent. This is the most despicable person who ever lived. He was a rapist. He was a pedophile. He was incestuous. He was a mass murderer. He was a sadistic torturer. He was a human trafficker. He was a ruthless terrorist. He was a thief. He was a liar. There is nothing worthwhile in this man's life. And Muslims kill for him. The answer, Israel, is to expose the truth about Muhammad from their own scriptures. The first Muslims, of course, inspired the Nazis, and that they told upon themselves, copiously documenting their atrocities. This means, of course, that they were hopelessly immoral and likely sadistic, just like the Nazis who emulated them. These are all confessions. Tabari, Volume 8, 117. Daya had asked the messenger for Safiya when the prophet chose her for himself. Muhammad gave Daya her two cousins instead. This is human sexual trafficking. You would think that progressives would still have just this tiny little bit of cerebral process left in their wee little brains, and just maybe a touch of morality that isn't destroyed in their hearts, so that they could recognize that a religion that does these things, that traffics women sexually, ought not be their partner. They ought not march with them. They ought not celebrate them on college campuses. They do not speak on this religion's behalf and against their Jewish victims. Is there anything functioning in your head? Anything in your heart? I speak particularly to Jewish progressives. Well, it was a 2-for-1 deal. After all, the nonprofit could be so considerate when it came to sharing Jewish sex slaves, so long as he got the first pick. Ishak 5:11. When Dia protested, wanting to keep Saphia for himself, the apostle traded for Saphia by giving Dia her 2 cousins. The women of Kabar were distributed among the Muslims. They gang raped them. Same thing that happened on 10/7. And you want to blame Hamas and not Muhammad. Not very intelligent, Israel. Let there be no doubt in anyone's mind that the first and best Muslims, Muhammad included, were sexual predators. Rape is part of the religious DNA. It is a form of terrorism. These men all punched their ticket to hell. Hopefully, they will all be beaten, then sodomized, and then castrated in the presence of their victims before their departure. It's only fair. I'll bet Muhammad is a real screamer. Yeah, that's one of the things most people don't know. Yahweh's into recompense. There are crimes such as what these Muslims did on this day, providing the dress rehearsal for 10/7, this time at Kabar, that are so heinous that merely sending souls like Muhammad and the first Muslims to hell is not enough. Those they tortured, those they gang raped, those they mutilated need closure. They deserve closure. They need to see that those who preyed upon them, who mutilated them, who tortured them, who raped them, while they had or held down, while they were tied down, get what they deserve. And so the souls of those that they abused, that they murdered, that they tortured, they burned alive, will have the opportunity to see the perpetrators receive 7-fold what they perpetrated. And that is before they're sent to hell. God is fair after all. How is it even possible that a man like Muhammad, a scumbag like Muhammad, the trash of the earth, the most repulsive man who ever lived, sexually and also violently, could be revered as the messenger of God when he had men killed so that he could have sex with their wives and their daughters, with him trading women as sex slaves, engaged in human trafficking to reward his killers. How ignorant, how irrational, how totally immoral must humankind be to allow this to continue to happen without holding Islam accountable for allowing those who are perverted with this diabolical religion to move into the homes of those that they will terrorize, abuse, rape, and kill. Every Islamic scholar, every imam, every student of the religion knows that this occurred. They know that Muhammad deliberately committed these crimes, and yet they tout him as if he were an exemplar of virtue, a moral bastion among men, when the evidence proves otherwise. They must lie, because without lies, there is no Islam. Now, I've come to despise Muhammad. I don't much like pedophiles and rapists. I don't like mass murderers and terrorists. I don't like thieves and liars. So, yeah, I despise Muhammad, as should everyone. And I hate his wannabe God, as should you. There is no gray area here, no benefit of the doubt. Muhammad and the first Muslims committed these heinous crimes, and they must be held accountable. I get so goddamn upset when some libertard says, I would present your interpretation of Islam on my deathbed. I don't have an interpretation of Islam. I'm reading theirs. This is from Muhammad. It is from the first Muslims. It is the essence of the religion. There is no other interpretation of it. The only way that you could dismiss this is to dismiss the entire religion. You'd have to throw away its entire scripture base. Islam ceases to exist if what I'm sharing with you is not true. Returning to the bloody scene, Muhammad was faced with a problem. There were more Jewish widows to rape than there were Muslims to rape them. And they all had multiple women in Yathrib that they had also already sexually abused. With the maximum permissible set at 4, for all but Muhammad, of course, the non-prophet had to come up with some religious mumbo-jumbo to turn gang rape into an approved Islamic benefit and a terrorist reward. Well, this sleight of hand was called the muta. It is a 3-day marriage, giving his militants a license to do with their prisoners whatever they pleased. But since Muhammad wasn't done torturing and slaughtering, he didn't want his mercenaries distracted too soon. So Bukhari, volume 5, book 59, number 527, on the day of Kabar, Allah's apostle forbade the muta, or temporary marriage. We have work to do. Kill now, rape later. Plunder now. Coitus later. Bukhari, volume 5, book 59, number 512. The prophet had their men killed, their children and women taken as captives. Safiya was among the captives. She first came in the shirt of Daya, but later she came to belong to the prophet. Muhammad made her a free slave as her mahar, dowry. So she was free to be raped as he saw fit. Isn't that lovely? You kill her father, you torture her husband, you murder all of her people, and you rape every woman that she had ever known, and you gave her a dowry. Free to rape. Well, translated into common English, Muhammad performed some Islamic hocus pocus to make non-consensual sex seem moral. And that's all Islam was, really. It was just an act. An Oscar-winning performance by one of the greatest con artists who ever lived. Bukhari, book 5, or volume 5, book 59, number 512. The captives of Kabar were divided among the Muslims. Then Muhammad began taking the homes and property that were closest to him. Islam had become nothing more than a criminal enterprise, more savage and immoral than the mafia. And the Godfather was busy establishing Islam's Sunnah, our traditions on this day. Ishaq 5:12. The apostle prohibited 4 things the morning of the Kabar raid: carnal intercourse with pregnant women who were captured, mingling his seed with another man's, which means that the Muslims were free to rape those who weren't pregnant. Nor is it lawful for him to rape her until she is at a state of cleanliness, not menstruating. Nor can a Muslim eat the flesh of donkeys, since it might be considered cannibalism, considering these asses and what these asses had become, or eat any carnivorous animal, since they might staring each other to shreds under those circumstances, nor sell any booty before it has been duly allotted, because, well, Muhammad wanted first dibs. The tradition continues to lay down the law, and the sand pirates, the rapists, and the terrorists would have you know, Ishaq 5:12, nor is it lawful for a Muslim to ride an animal belonging to the booty without the intention of returning it to the pool when he has worn it out. Nor is it lawful for him to wear a garment belonging to the booty, stolen, of course, of the Muslims with the intention of returning it to the pool of stolen goods when he has reduced it to rags. For those seeking to be a Muslim terrorist, these might be words to live by, and that might be why there were no prohibitions or restrictions on murder, arson, torture, robbery, or rape. Ishaq 5:12. On the day of Kabar, the apostle forbade us to buy or sell gold or gold coin or silver ore or silver coin. He who controls the bank controls the men by way of their wallets. This is true even among thieves. Before we leave this appalling attempt to establish Islamic law, Sharia, I want to solve the perplexing donkey conundrum. It's no small matter to the Muslims. There are no fewer than a dozen Bukhari hadith from this day alone focused on the lowly ass. So let's see if we can figure out the reason for the restriction. Bukhari, volume 5, book 59, number 526. On the day of Kabar, Allah's apostle forbade the eating of garlic and the meat of donkeys. Well, that wasn't much help. All it did was demonstrate that Muslims were poorly informed. Garlic is nature's best antibiotic and thus should be consumed. But Allah wasn't much of a medicine man. However, this trio of prescriptions should help tell the tale. Bukhari, volume 7, book 7, book 71, number 590. The climate of Medina did not suit some people, so the Prophet ordered them to drink camel's urine as a medicine. And when that made them even sicker, Bukhari, volume 7, book 71, number 592, I heard Allah's apostle saying, there is healing in black cumin for all diseases except death. Unless we forget the medicine man's prescription. Bukhari, same book, same volume, number 673. Allah's apostle said, if a fly falls into your drink, dip all of it into a cup and then throw it away. For in one of their wings is a disease, and in the other there is healing, an antidote or treatment for that disease. This is the lone prophet of 2 billion people who lived to kill Jews. Foolish did not make him frivolous. The next tradition provides a clue as to why he was upset. Bukhari, volume 5, book 59, number 511. Someone came to Allah's apostle and said, donkeys have been eaten by Muslims. The Prophet kept quiet. The man again said, the donkeys have been eaten. Muhammad kept quiet. And after the third time, the Prophet ordered the caller to announce, Allah and his apostle forbid you to eat the meat of donkeys. Then the cooking pots were overturned while the meat was still boiling in them. Wondering why he did so? I discovered this clue. Bukhari, volume 5, book 59, number 531. We were afflicted with hunger, severe hunger, the day we raided Kabar. While the cooking pots were boiling and the food was ready to eat, the announcer of the prophet said, "Do not eat anything, especially donkey meat. Turn your cookie pots upside down and throw it away." We realized that the prophet had forbidden such food because the humus had not been taken out of it. The humus, or habis, is the prophet's share of the booty seized by Muslim militants. He was so jealous, so greedy, that his men would starve rather than Muhammad being cheated out of his 20% share. Now, he didn't do anything for his 20% share, mind you. It was his goons that captured everything. They were the ones who plundered. But until he got his 20% share, until he ate first, his men couldn't satiate their starvation. That's the kind of scumbag that Muhammad was. The donkeys belonged to the Jews. They were beasts of burden, used to till the fields and to carry crops to the market. Thus they were a spoil to be divided among the Muslim militants, with Muhammad getting the largest share. And he would rather see his people starve than renounce his claim to stolen property. And so now you know the rest of the story. Muhammad was selfish, self-absorbed. He was a creep. The first Islamic historian and biographer each report a hadith along the same lines. Tabari, Volume 8, number 117, and Ishaq 512. The Banu Sham of Aslam, these are newly recruited militants, came to the messenger and they complained, "Muhammad, we have been hurt by drought and possess nothing." Although they had fought for the prophet, they found he had nothing he was at least willing to give them. The apostle said, "O Allah, you know their condition. I have no strength and nothing I want to give them from the booty of the Muslims that they have stolen from me. So conquer for them the wealthiest of the Kabar homes, the ones with the most food and fat meat. In other words, steal your own damn booty. You'll starve before I share any of my confiscated wealth with you," which is why I overturned all of the cooking pots, or told you to do so with the meat still in them. In this way, Muhammad mirrors Allah. They are just playing with Muslims, using you. And in addition, these hadith prove 3 points that I've been trying to share. First, Islam was all but dead after Hudaybiyah. And it had to be resurrected, what was now the 10th time, to survive. And it was resurrected by the bloodletting of this day against Jews. Second, men who steal from others do not value what they have taken. They must score ever more frequent fixes to satiate their unbridled appetite. That's why there were 75 terrorist raids in just 10 years. And third, apart from terrorist raids, the first Muslims didn't work. They produced nothing of value. They became parasites. They are exactly what we witness among the malcontent Muslims of Gaza. Now, proving that Allah was a wannabe terrorist too, Tabari, Volume 8, 117. The next morning, Allah opened the township of Sab ben Muda for them to conquer. There was no community in Kabar more abounding in food. After the prophet had defeated some of their settlement and taken their property, they reached the communities of Watib and Solum, which were the last of the Kabar neighborhoods to be conquered. Muhammad besieged the inhabitants between 13 and 19 nights. Mind you, just as the case with the Jews and Yathrib, who were annihilated by the Muslims, whose women were raped by the Muslims, whose children were sold into slavery by the Muslims to acquire more weapons. Only the Muslims had weapons. And yet, rather than fighting, since they were the only ones who were armed, Muslims are always the same. They would rather torment their victims. Now, calling Islam under these circumstances peaceful racks up as one of the most egregious lies of all time. This wasn't even war. The Muslims weren't out defending themselves or their religion. This was a terrorist raid with a racist bent. The first Muslims were anti-Semitic savages. Not all that different, maybe not different at all, than what we witness today of Muslims everywhere. While Islam has always been violent, Muslims have seldom been good at it. They make up for their ineptitude with religious fervor. In this case, swords were no match for shovels. Ishaq 5:14 and Tabari 8:119. Encamped at their fortress, Muhammad presented his war banner to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was the lone supporter of Muhammad early on. It was Abu Bakr's 6-year-old daughter that Muhammad raped when, if he was born in the year of the elephant, he would have been 66 years old. And he sent him against the Jews. He fought, but he retreated, suffering losses. I guess shovels and baskets were too much for these sword-wielding Muslim militants. The following morning, the same thing happened to Umar. This is the first and the second caliph of Islam. When they returned to Muhammad, Umar's companion accused him of cowardice, and he accused them of the same. The messenger said, "Tomorrow I shall give the banner to a man who loves Allah and his messenger, and Allah will conquer it by this means." The next day, Bakr and Umar vied for the war banner, but the Prophet called Ali, who was suffering from inflamed eyes, and he spat upon his eyes and gave him the banner. Ali advanced upon the people of Kabar. In the fight, he lost his shield, so he laid hold of the front door of and used it as a shield. This is so full of crap, it's just hard to even share with you. He kept it in his hand as he fought until Allah gave Muslims the victory. They fought unarmed civilians. All they had was shovels and baskets. Don't the Muslims even read their own material? When the siege was over, 8 of us tried to lift the door, but we couldn't even turn it over. Such is the stuff of religious legends. Knowing how he was introduced to us a decade ago, either as the skinny-legged fat boy of Kabaville, well, he must have got a personal trainer, or he found a hell of a propagandist. I'm betting on the latter. The Bukhari Hadith starts off the same way, but ends oddly. This Bukhari, Volume 5, Book 59, number 521. On the day of Kabar, Allah's apostle said, "Tomorrow I will give this flag to a man through whom Allah will give us victory." Allah said, "Oh, Allah's apostle, I will fight them until they become like us." What? Like us? Cruel? Demonic? Mercenaries? Murderous terrorists? Allah's apostle said, "Proceed, and when you enter the town, call them to embrace Islam and inform them of Allah's rights which they should observe. For if a single man is led on the right path of Islam by Allah through you, that will be better for you than nice red camels. Oh, remember how we began this by the first Muslims making it obvious to us that Muhammad admitted that he killed the men, that all he yelled at them was Allahu Akbar, and then he enslaved the women and children, and he stole all their property. Yeah. They weren't looking for converts. Of course, I know what is, I should say I don't actually know what is more perverted. Suggesting that the victims of a terrorist raid should be called to Islam before they are slaughtered, robbed, enslaved, and raped, or suggesting that a man's soul is better than a nice red camel. Moving on, it was evidently important to some Sunnis to make sure that Abu Bakr and Umar were perceived as being no less brutal. So Tabari, volume 8, page number 119. The messenger often had migraine, so he would remain a day or two without coming out. When Muhammad encamped at Kabar, he came down with a migraine and could not come out, so Bakr took the Prophet's war banner and he fought victoriously. Next, Umar took it and he fought with even more ferocity than the first fighting. Isn't it lovely how they all got along and supported one another while slaughtering innocent civilians so they could plunder them? They even shared what they had stolen. But alas, we read some of the most despicable words ever scribed in the name of every religion, because there has never been a religion as disgusting as Islam. Tabari, volume 8, page 121, and Ishaq, page 515. Ali struck the Jew with a swift blow that split open his helmet, his neck protector, and his head, landing in his rear teeth. When the Muslims entered the city, Muhammad conquered Kumas, the neighborhood of Abi Hukak, and Safiya bint Huray was brought to him, and another woman with her. Bilal led them past some of the Jews we had slain, including the woman's dead husband. When she saw them, the woman with Safiya cried out, slapped her face, and poured dust on her head. When Allah's Prophet saw her, he said, "Take this she-devil away from me." End quote. This is Muhammad. This is Islam. This is what occurred on 10/7 because of Muhammad at Islam. You're only making yourself vulnerable to pretend this occurred because of Hamas. Grieving for those who had, that he himself, Muhammad, had butchered. For his religion was beyond Muhammad. He was a psychopath. His lack of empathy is a sure sign of this diagnosis. This woman cried as she was dragged past the mutilated corpses of her family and friends. Yet the man who had led the terrorist raid so that he could steal their possessions called the victim a devil. So why does anybody wonder that in front of the coffins of little children, the devils of Islam posted Netanyahu as if he were the devil? Everything in Islam is backwards, upside down. I dare say that when I began sharing these recitals from the Islamic scriptures with you yesterday, now we are 8 hours into this process, You did not expect that Islam, Muhammad, Allah, the Quran, or the Hadith could be even 1% this bad. Islam is a special kind of evil. It is the most despicable religion ever perpetrated on humankind. Muhammad terrorized, plundered, and murdered while professing to be God's messenger. That made him the most wretched man to have ever lived. Yes, we all know that the Crusaders and the Inquisition, they were brutal, and that Protestantism was born out of a lust for power, sex, and money. But it's not the same, not even remotely. The clerics and kings that conspired together to control their subjects precluded copies of the Torah and prophets to be distributed among the masses. People were misguided hypocrites who used religion to satiate their own cravings. Muhammad, by contrast, claimed to speak for God. He didn't corrupt Islam. He made Islam as perverted as the spirit that possessed him. This beast of a man was out of control. Tabari 8, 122, and Ishaq 5:15. Muhammad commanded that Safiya should be kept behind him, and he threw his cloak over her. Thus the Muslims knew that he had chosen her for himself. Muhammad was a serial rapist. And he didn't just rape women. He tormented them first. He killed their husbands. He killed their sons. He murdered their fathers. And then he handed out their sisters to be raped by his goons. He promoted Islam based upon using rape as an incentive. This religion should never exist. No one should be stupid enough, immoral enough to call themselves a Muslim, much less kill for Islam, much less tolerate Islam in their midst. There is nothing more despicable in the history of humankind. Continuing to endure the saga of the only religion literally born in a milieu of grotesque immorality, of human trafficking, of thievery, of rape, of mass murder, and of terror. We discover that the non-prophet would now include torture in his list of hate crimes. Tabari 8, 122, and Ishaq 5:15. And as I share these words with you, know that the Muslims who went into Israel on 10/7 did this same thing. They not only burned little babies alive, they tied up mothers and fathers next to each other and incapacitated their children right next to them on the floor as they sat down and ate their Passover dinner before them, laughed on them and peed on them, and then systematically, with shears and with knives, they cut off each of the fingers and toes of the parents and the children while each watched. And when they got tired of that, they gouged out their eyes. This is what Islam does to people. This is why Islam cannot be tolerated. Reading now from the first Muslims. Abi Harak, this was Safiya's father, held the treasure of the Nadir. That was the second Jewish tribe that Muhammad exiled from Yathrib. Now you know where they went after Muhammad stole their homes in Yathrib. They went here, and now he was killing them. He was brought to Allah's messenger, and he questioned him, but Hukak denied knowing where it was. So the prophet questioned other Jews. One said, I have seen Hananiah, that would be Safiya's husband, walk around a ruin. Muhammad had Hanaya brought to him, and he said, "Do you know that if we find it, I shall kill you?" "Yes," Kanaya said. "He's going to kill him anyway." This was Muhammad's second assault on the Nadir. He had stolen their homes, their businesses, and their land the year after he banished the Qanuqa, which was a year before he slaughtered the Qurayza. All the Nadir had retained was what they had been able to carry on their backs. As revolting as these events appear, what actually occurred was far more gruesome. The accounts we are reading are all from the Muslims who perpetrated these crimes to showcase the superiority of their religion. There is no other source of information, none, from which a different interpretation may be drawn, such as that of these poor victims who were abused by Islam. May their lives matter. May you listen to what happened to them. May you care, just as I ask you to care and listen and watch what happened to those Muslims abused on 10/7. Not a word concerning this man's life, his words or deeds, was chronicled by an independent source or by someone who survived the Islamic Holocaust. And even the Islamic traditions, the ink would not stain paper for 2 centuries after the demise of the victim and his attacker. Therefore, the Muhammad of Islam, the first Muslims, and the formation of the religion are as you have heard them here. They are otherwise unknowable. Alternate theories have literally nothing to stand on. There is no other interpretation. There is no other evidence. With each act of violence, Islam's lone voice, its instigator and false prophet, became more gluttonous, callous, heinous, and ultimately insane. Tabari, Volume 8, 122, and Ishaq 550, corroborating it. The prophet commanded that the ruin should be dug up. Some treasure was extracted from it. Then Muhammad asked Hanaya for the rest. He refused to surrender it. So Allah's messenger gave orders concerning him to Zabir, saying, "Torture him until you root out and extract what he has." So Zabir kindled a fire on Kanaya's chest, twirling it with his fire stick until Kanaya was near death. Then the messenger gave him to Maslama, who beheaded him. This is what the Muslims did on 10/7. If you haven't watched the raw footage, you should see it for yourself. This is what the first responders who went there and chronicled the carnage reported. If you haven't read it, you should. Torturing a man whose home and property he had stolen twice, whose wife he was about to rape, demoted Muhammad from a bloodthirsty terrorist and thief to a demonic sadist. He was a reprehensible psychopath, the most deplorable man who ever lived. By comparison, he was worse than Hitler, Stalin, and Mao combined. Anyone who promotes Muhammad's verbal diarrhea as godly, Muhammad's life as exemplary, or Muhammad's war manifesto as a peaceful religion bears the stain and stigma of the degenerate who instigated it among fellow malcontent and murderous Muslims, all to satiate his cravings. This is Islam. This is the Islam of Muhammad, of the Quran, of Allah. This is the same Islam that was witnessed in Gaza yesterday and the same Islam on display on 10/7 of 23. There is no other Islam. Well, it wouldn't be worth the saliva to spit on his grave. In this case, I rather like the notion of a bodily resurrection, or at least of having the opportunity to wrap some ultra-sensitive skin around this psychotic soul. He has earned the opportunity to endure sevenfold the torment he inflicted before I have the honor and responsibility to dispatch his sorry, perverted soul to hell for all eternity. It is long past the time the preponderance of people had their collective arrogance and ignorance about Muhammad, Allah, the Quran, and Hadith shed, and acknowledge that Islam is evil personified. It is the most deceitful and deadliest dogma ever conceived and perpetrated on humankind. The realization that Muslims terrorize and slaughter based upon this retrobate's testimony to this day is inexcusable. To witness agitated anti-Semitic mobs march through the streets chanting, "Kill the Jews and free Palestine," because of this miscreant is inexcusable. It's appalling. It's disgusting. Fortunately, the apologists and the protesters are all wearing self-applied labels and will be readily identifiable when the time comes to round them up, something which will occur within, 8.5 years from these events, this broadcast, because of what they perpetrated and what they are celebrating. Then we can apply a few more tags: ignorant, irrational, immoral, and insane, worthless, counterproductive, anti-Semitic, and soon to be dead. Had America been informed, rational, and moral, in the aftermath of September 11th, 2001, Islamic suicide bombings of New York and Washington, the nation would have protected its citizens and held the perpetrators accountable by declaring war on Islam for having perpetrated this attack. The religion would have been excoriated with the words that these Muslims have shared with us. It would have been isolated. It would have been quarantined. The oil beneath the bloody sands where Islam took root, and now home to the despicable despots of these Islamic regimes, inspiring, enabling, and funding the murderous mujahideen, would have been confiscated. And in this case, the turnaround would have been fair play, since without petrodollars, Islam shrivels up and dies. Had America done what I pleaded for her to do in writing and on thousands of talk radio programs over a score of years ago, October 7th, 23 would never have occurred. Europe would not be hopelessly infested by Muslims, and Iran wouldn't be threatening the annihilation of Israel. But instead, the United States spilled blood and coin, lashing out at a symptom, and after failing miserably, now joins a progressive international chorus of immoral ignoramuses lecturing and threatening Israel as the nation battles against Islam to survive. Everyone guilty of seducing lost souls, be it in the media, madrasa, or mosque, into following Muhammad's example should be identified, silenced, and held accountable. Ignoring Islam and lashing out against Al-Qaeda is akin to targeting Hitler's SS instead of Nazism, or blaming the kamikazes for the prior world war instead of the belief system that turned them into suicidal killing machines. If nations continue to fight the symptoms of this disease, like the fascist Ba'ath Party in Iraq or Syria, and organizations like Al-Qaeda, even the Islamic State and Hamas, Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad, the real villain, Islam, will manufacture more terrorists than the world can endure. And while I do not advocate violence, the most compassionate thing we can do is to silence, sideline, and defang Islamic clerics, despots, and jihadists in the context of a justifiable defense campaign to prevent them from sending thousands, if not millions, to their doom. And this will be the result. Tabbatis, Volume 8, 123, and Eshach, 5:15. Allah's apostle besieged the vital Jewish community of Kabar until they could hold out no longer. Finally, they were certain that they would perish. They asked Muhammad to banish them and spare their lives, which he did to some, and the prophet took possession of their property. Before you look at this as an act of mercy, allowing a small percentage of the people he had besieged and slaughtered to live, that he had nearly starved to death, and that he had deprived of women so that his men could enslave and rape them, you should know that it was actually simply economics. By allowing a smattering of the Jews to surrender, Muhammad claimed the entire spoil for himself. And now he had a caste of slave servants to harvest the date palms that he had seized. Nothing more than that. Eshach 5:15. When the people of Fadak heard what had happened, they sent word to the messenger, asking them to banish them and spare their lives, saying they too would leave him their property. When the people of Kabar surrendered on these conditions, the survivors asked Muhammad to employ them on their farms for half of a share of whatever they produced. They said, "We know more about farming," saying that you're terrorists and all. So Muhammad made peace with them for half a share, provided that if we want to expel you, we may. He made a similar agreement with Fadak. So Kabar became the prey of the Muslims, while Fadak belonged exclusively to the Messenger of Allah, becoming his personal property because the Muslims had not attacked its people with cavalry. Muhammad was such a conniving and self-serving son of a bitch. It is a miracle that Islam and Muslims can endure his stench. Pray is an apt description of what the Jews were to the first Muslims. And it was to be a never-ending assault. From many, soon there would be none. Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 53, number 380. Umar expelled all of the Jews and the Christians from Arabia. Allah's apostle, after conquering Kabar, thought of expelling the Jews from the land which, after he conquered it, belonged to Allah, Allah's apostle, and the Muslims. But the Jews requested Allah's apostle to leave them there on the condition that they would do the labor and get half of the fruits the land would yield. Allah's apostle said, "We shall keep you on these terms as long as we wish." Thus they stayed to the time of Umar's Caliphate, when he expelled them. This is tough to swallow. It's so inconsistent with the progressive nonsense spewed out with reckless abandon in academia, in the media, internal politics, international politics, the UN. Today's youth have been so indoctrinated by the politics of deception, duplicity, and revision, and hypocrisy, that they are not only wrong about almost everything, but there's no way to reason with them. And the far right is also wrong. They fail to understand how their convoluted conspiracies do nothing but confuse more people. There are now very few humans worth saving, fewer still who can be salvaged because so few are thinking. Now, why is it the world at large has chosen to ignore the bloodlust and the broken bodies of Kabar, these Jews who suffered, like the Koreza who were mutilated and murdered before them? Why are so many people unable or unwilling to confront what Islam does to men, to turn them into monsters? Pure, fundamental, original, uncorrupted Islam enslaved and exterminated these people for the very crimes of being industrious, but defenseless. They tried to survive alongside the evil that they had seen emerge in their midst, but they lost everything. Additional proof, I offer this admission from the lips of Islam's lone instigator. Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 52, number 143. The Prophet said in a speech to Ansar, "Choose one of your slave boys to serve me in an expedition to Kabar." So he chose me, even though I was just nearing puberty. I served Muhammad when he stopped to rest. I heard him say repeatedly, "Allah, I seek refuge with you from distress and from sorrow, from helplessness and laziness, from miserliness, from cowardice, from being heavily in debt, and from being overcome by men." This was how Muhammad saw himself. And in fact, it was what he had become. He was a toxic, blood-sucking parasite. Bukhari, Volume 4, Book 52, number 256. The Prophet passed away, and the Prophet passed by. He will pass away, but not on this day. The Prophet passed by, and he was asked whether it was permissible to attack infidels at night with the probability of exposing their women and children to danger. The Prophet replied, "Their women and children are from them." Actually, Muhammad didn't want the women and children killed. The women were to be raped, the children sold as sex slaves to buy more weapons. He just wanted to kill the men. Ishaq 574, "In faith, I do not fear the army of fate. He gave us the blood of their best men to drink when we led our army against them. We were a great army with a pungent smell, and we attack continuously wherever our enemy is found." The faith of Islam caused this man to say that Muhammad gave him the blood of their best men to drink. He said we had a pungent smell. We attack continuously. Part of that, don't you understand? Ishaq 580, "Our strong warriors obey his orders to the letter." They do today too. By Allah's religion, we are undeniably strong. You would think that our horses gallop with bits in their mouths and that the sounds of demons are among them. The day we trod down the unbelievers, there was no deviation or turning from the apostles' order. During the battle, the people heard our excoriations to fight and the smashing of skulls by swords that sent heads flying. We severed necks with a warrior's blow. Often we have left the slain cut to pieces, and a widow crying over her mutilated husband. 'Tis Allah, not men, we seek to please. All of you progressives, disgusting scumbags that you are, out marching with Muslims who wished to exterminate Jews and eliminate Israel. All of you who have sided with those who perpetrated 10/7 and did this very thing ought to have these words written on your forehead. Eshach 580, our strong warriors obey his orders. That would be Muhammad's order to the letter, and they still do. By us, Allah's religion, that would be Islam, is strong. You would think that when our horses gallop with the bits in their mouths or our motor scooters roar, that the sounds of demons are among them. And yes, they are. The day we trod down the unbelievers, read Jews if you prefer, there was no deviation or turning from Muhammad's orders. During the battle, the people heard our exhortation to fight, smashing of skulls with swords that sent heads flying. We severed necks with a warrior's blow. Often we have left the slain cut to pieces, with a widow crying over her mutilated husband. 'Tis Allah, not man, we seek to please. Would make Allah Satan, wouldn't it? Eshach 587. Kabab Melech reacted to the apostles' decision. He said, we put an end to doubt at Kabar. He did. But we gave our swords a rest. If our swords could have spoken, our blades would have said, give us dos or tekif. We will tear off the roofs and Waj. We will make homes desolate. Our cavalry will come upon you, leaving behind a tangled mess. When we assaulted a town, they sound the cry of alarm, but our sharp cutting swords flash like lightning. By them we bring death to those who struggle against us. Flowing blood was mingled with saffron. The morn the forces met. They were taken by surprise, and we surrounded them with our troops. Now, Eshach 587. Our onslaught will not be a weak, faltering affair. We will fight as long as we live. We will fight you until you turn to Islam, humbly seeking refuge. We will fight not caring whom we meet. We will fight whether we destroy ancient holdings or newly gotten gains. We have cut off every opponent's nose and ears with our fine swords. We have driven them violently before us at the command of Allah and Islam. We will fight until our religion is established, and we will plunder them, for they must suffer disgrace. Eshach 592. The apostle held a large number of captives. There were 6,000 women and children prisoners. They had captured so many sheep and camels they could not be counted. Muhammad was also ignorant and immoral as a sadistic, schizophrenic narcissist with a really crappy attitude and a penchant for sexual abuse, slaughter, and duplicity. He suffered anxiety attacks, bouts of depression, and he was suicidal because he knew that he was a fraud who could and should have been held accountable. Like his ungod, the non-prophet was individually helpless and inept. He was a self-indulgent and greedy miser and mean-spirited bastard. Never Having earned a shekel, Muhammad knew nothing of honest labor or the value of capital. He was always in debt, no matter how much he stole. The economic plight and impoverishment of the Islamic world, apart from petrodollars, is a direct result of Muhammad's criminal enterprise. This is why Islamic nations remain the world's least productive and inventive. Muslims as a culture are destructive economically, stifling far more commerce than they inspire. Gaza serves as a telling microcosm of Islam's parasitic and cannibalistic nature. This should not be surprising, nor is it resolvable, because Islam was financed by the spoils of war and the slave trade. Muhammad and his fellow Muslim malcreants were akin to maggots feeding on the corpses of those they had slaughtered. The Arabs were relatively poor, making the Jews a tasty treat, and so Islam would devour them. But it didn't stop there. After overhunting God's people and satiating Allah's cravings, within a year, Muhammad's fattened mujahideen would attack the Byzantines. Within 3, his companions would subdue Arabia in the War of Compulsion, taxing everyone. Within a decade of the first Muslims, they would conquer Yemen, Persia, Egypt, Syria, and Judea. Within a century, the sword of Islam would be wielded above the necks of millions, and over 100 million would die. It was all for ill-gotten gain. They plundered and they raped, to be sure, but their principal tools were the zakat and jizya taxes, which they imposed on all people, rich and poor. And all the while, those who killed had rivers of blood and not a drop of ink to testify to their beginnings. Apart from imposing his dominance over his harem and implicating Christians so that he could justify bludgeoning them, the Quran was silent. It no longer mattered. Satan and the devil's advocate had achieved what they had sought. There were now a sufficient number of Islamic hoodlums to suppress dissent, and they were adequately and now incentivized to deprive all remaining Arabs of their freedoms and their human rights. The world was about to pay the most horrendous price in the history of humankind. Muhammad was also a coward, indeed a weasel, as are all Islamic imams today. They are ever ready to send others off to their death, but you'll never see them doing what they inspire. They corrupt boys with promises of virginal rewards while they remain in their mosques and madrasas. Further, like most loudmouth bullies, Muhammad and those who followed him found pleasure in tormenting the defenseless. That is why suicide bombers and Islamic terrorists attacked unarmed civilians. With the 1-2 punch of Hudaybiyah and Kabar, Islam had sunk to a new low. With each passing day, it became evident that Muhammad had lost control of himself and that he was overcome by madness. It was now obvious that he was, in fact, as he admitted, demon-possessed and insane. He had become paranoid, with the most recent surahs now fixated on attacking dissent and deserters. Orders to submit and obey, to fight and kill, dominate the Quran's last revelations. As men sought freedom and peace, Muhammad reacted by becoming more dictatorial and warlike. And as a result, the land of submission and Islam, there are no democracies, no freedom of religion, of the press or of speech, of travel, or even for imported workers, for women, or for sex slaves. 1 billion Muslims struggle to survive in countries brutalized by these tyrants and dictators. And it's not hard to see why. the first Muslims emulated their warlord, becoming increasingly belligerent, callous, and brutal. Well, this all leads us to an unappealing place. As a result of Muhammad's personal failings, the Islamic world is devoid of everything civilized people hold dear. Muslims wallow in poverty. Life isn't worth living. They have no freedom of speech or of choice. Muslims are among the most poorly educated and most indoctrinated people on earth, as well as the most murderous. Using Gaza as an example, the average IQ is a dysfunctional 69 points, while 100 is the average apart from Islam. Following the example of a perverted sexist, Muhammad's men abuse women. They are violent. 20% of the world's population is responsible for 90% of the planet's upheaval and terror, as well as war. If only 20% of Muslims are good ones, then Islam makes them 222% more violent than the rest of us. Frankly, there's no benefit to any of this. Islam is a plague. It's one humanity cannot survive. In the opening volume of Goddamn Religion, I shared a quote from Islamic scholar Dr. D.S. Margalith. This might be a good place to review it in the context of what we have just learned. What may have seemed as extreme now appears understated. Here is what he had to say, and I will end this program with his words. The character attributed to Muhammad in the biography of Ibn Ishaq is exceedingly unfavorable. In order to gain his ends, Muhammad recoils from no expedient, and he approves of similar unscrupulousness on the part of his adherents when exercised in his self-interest. He organizes assassinations and wholesale massacres. His character is that of the tyrant of Medina. He is a robber chief whose political economy consists of securing and dividing plunder. He is himself an unbridled libertine, morally and sexually unrestrained, and he encourages the same passion in his followers. For whatever he does, he is prepared to plead the express authorization of his deity. It is, however, impossible to find any Islamic religious doctrine that he is not prepared to abandon in order to secure a political end. At different points in his career, he abandons the unity of God and his claim to the title of prophet. There is a disagreeable picture of the founder of a religion here that cannot be pleaded that he was drawn by the enemy, because in fact, everything we have considered has been presented in Muhammad's own words. This is the Islam of Gazans. This is the Islam of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of Iran. This is the Islam of the Muslims who perpetrated 10/7 and those who celebrated the murder of Israeli children. This is the only Islam that has ever existed, and it is reprehensible. I thank you for listening. I am Craig Winn, and this has been a summer edition of the YAHOWAH blog.